Hey everybody. So I've talked about doing some live Q&A sessions, and hopefully someday I'll get more time to plan that sort of thing. But for now, I want to just answer some of the questions people have been asking me, maybe just one at a time in a video like this. So I'm starting a Q&A playlist on the Culture, Faith, and Politics YouTube channel. And so this is going to be the first video to go in that playlist. I got a great question from a listener last week. She responded to a video that I made recently where I said that you can't follow Jesus and follow Donald Trump. And so I want to answer the great question she asked. She said, I follow your channel closely and I read your most recent book. I'm a big fan of your viewpoints. With that said, I was disturbed by your words that you can't be a follower of both Jesus and of Trump. Isn't that the same as some Republican preachers who say that you can't be a Christian and vote Democrat? And yeah, I think that's a great question. And I had to go back and listen to what I said. Because if I said something that sounded like I'm saying you can't be a Christian and vote for Trump, then I absolutely have to clear that up. So I found the part that she's talking about, and I'm going to play it here, and then I'll explain what I mean. And I stand by what I said, that you can't follow Jesus and follow Donald Trump. But my statement isn't about how we each might have voted. It's about our actions going forward. Are Christians going to support Trump no matter what he does and says, like a huge percentage of them have done in the past? That's what I mean by following Trump. Or are we going to be salt and light in the world? Are we going to speak truth to power? Are we going to teach our kids and our grandkids about the way of Jesus, but then nullify everything we teach them by embracing a leader who mocks the way of Jesus? So anyway, I'm going to play that short clip, and then I'll talk about it on the other side.
I love America. I love our history, as complex and as mixed as it is. And I'm optimistic about our future, but I'm only optimistic because I believe we still have time to get our heart right. You can't follow Jesus and follow Trump. You can't. And however you may have voted, if you continue now to support Trump and his movement, then you're choosing the way of Trump over the way of Jesus. We're going to see this unfold in the coming months, and you'll see the way of Trump, and there's no way that you'll be able to honestly reconcile it with the way of Jesus.
So first of all, the listener who asked the question is right. I've always been very careful not to say that you can't be a Christian and vote for Trump. I get a fair amount of pushback for that from people who don't like it that I call Trump's voters Christians. But I've said it again and again. I just know very, very many sincere Christians who voted for Donald Trump. I mean, it's kind of frustrating to me, and I think that oftentimes they're being taken advantage of, but I've consistently refused to say that they're not Christians. I know them. So what I mean is that no matter who we each ended up voting for, we can't follow Jesus and follow Trump at the same time. We're going to be presented with hundreds of choices in the coming years that are going to get right at this point. And I say that because I've seen no evidence that Trump is going to change his political tactics. He uses certain tactics that are just decidedly anti-Christian, and we can't support him when he uses those tactics. So unless he does change, he's going to be making decisions and making statements that are just radically opposed to the way of Jesus. And that's going to force his followers to decide whether to speak against him or whether to defend the indefensible. So it's in those moments of testing that we're going to have to decide, am I going to follow the way of Jesus right now, or am I going to follow Trump? So just for a recent example here, I wrote a chapter in my book, The Christian Case Against Donald Trump. I wrote a chapter in it called The Way of Justice versus the Way of the Oppressor. And I laid out some basic fundamental principles for biblical justice in that book, for the way of Jesus regarding justice. So one of Trump's first acts as president-elect was to choose Matt Gaetz, of all people, to be his attorney general. And thankfully, Gaetz dropped out yesterday of consideration for that role. But let's just use that as an example of the sorts of things that I think are going to be coming down the pike. So, what are Christians who voted for Trump supposed to do with a choice like Matt Gaetz for Attorney General? Matt Gaetz was possibly the most obscene choice that Trump could have made for Attorney General. And if you don't know why I say that, then you can do some independent research on who Matt Gaetz is and decide for yourself. But here's why I think Trump chose him. Because for years, Trump has been trying to corrupt the very idea of justice in America. He wants what every authoritarian leader wants. He wants to use the justice system to empower himself and to oppress his enemies. And quite often, this type of leader will accuse their enemies or their opponents of doing the exact same things that they want to do, because it clears the way for them to say, well, of course I'm weaponizing the justice system. My opponent did too. Look at what Biden did to me. So that's just a normal sort of a tactic that they use. And so he chose Matt Gaetz, I believe, because Matt Gaetz has made statements that show that he's willing to go along with that. He's such a ridiculous choice that it undermines trust in the justice system completely. But then also he's shown a willingness in some of the things that he said to go after Trump's enemies. So I think that's why he was chosen. And on a deeper level, Trump was trying to force the Republicans in the Senate to allow him to get away with it. I think that through this appointment and others, he wants to force his party, the elected leaders in his party, at the very beginning of his term, to show complete subservience to him. He knows that elected Republicans fear his base, and I would say, as always, his mostly Christian base. So he's creating opportunities for those Republicans early on to publicly choose him over their conscience. He wants it to be visible that they do this. He wants them to choose loyalty to him over loyalty to their oath to protect the Constitution. They can't serve their oath and serve Donald Trump if he puts forward candidates for these offices who would undermine their oath. So they have to choose. And while he's at his most popular, he's just won an election, he's forcing them to publicly choose him over their oath to the Constitution. And it's not just with the Gaetz appointment. I mean, he's put forward several people who are obviously unqualified and possibly dangerous. And he's not being sneaky about it. He's asserting his dominance by choosing these obviously unqualified and dangerous candidates. He's asserting his dominance over the party by making them support some of these, just the worst cabinet appointments ever. So in the same way, Trump wants his Christian supporters to choose between swallowing his choices like this, like Matt Gaetz or whoever, or spitting them out and saying, enough, no. Trump chose the most outwardly terrible candidate for Attorney General he could find because he wants all of his supporters, from senators to regular voters, to make themselves complicit in a choice that they all know is wrong. So unless he changes radically, I think that he's going to do that sort of thing hundreds of times. So this is just one specific little example. So for instance, if a friend confronts us about that, about Trump's choice of Matt Gaetz as Attorney General of the United States, we have a choice right then to either follow Trump or to follow Jesus in that moment. We can't do both. The choice of somebody like Matt Gaetz is just too obviously a corruption of justice, and we can't go along with that and say that that's what Jesus would have us do. If we want to follow Jesus in that moment, the way of justice compels us to at least agree with our friend on that point. Say, yeah, okay, this is ridiculous. This is bad. So that the friend can at least feel a little less crazy, in that moment. And we can do a number of other things too. Like you could write a letter to a senator or speak out on social media or do what I do and start a whole YouTube channel about this stuff. But whatever we do, following Trump in that moment looks very different. If we're following Trump, then we'll probably just dismiss our friend's concerns, or we'll pretend not to know anything about the situation. That's what the senators often do. Or we'll even belittle our friend with personal attacks. And if Trump is taking a public action that just deeply corrupts the very idea of biblical justice, in that moment, it's simply impossible to follow him and to follow Jesus. We have to choose. And so I hope I'm wrong about this, but if we pay attention over the next 4 years, I think we're going to be given an opportunity almost every day to decide whether we're going to follow Trump or follow Jesus. And what following Trump would look like usually is going to be something pretty simple. Basically, are we going to ignore the things that he does that fly directly in the face of things that we claim to care about as followers of Jesus, things like truth and justice? Christians today in America don't have the luxury of ignoring the things that Donald Trump does as president. We lost that luxury when 81% of white evangelicals voted for him for a third time in this election, and when over 60% of white Christians of any kind voted for him. The world knows that people who call themselves Christians gave us Donald Trump. So he's going to be sworn in on January 20th, and unless we speak out against his abuses when they happen, the world is going to know that his Christian base endorses every action that he takes. So that's why this is important. So to answer the question, yes, I believe you can be a Christian and vote for Trump. My work here isn't about deciding who's a Christian and who isn't. I'm here to ask people who call themselves Christians to take that identity more seriously when it comes to politics, to not allow ourselves to be used by corrupt politicians who exploit a few cultural issues to keep themselves in power. It's not a black or white on and off switch sort of thing, that you're either a follower of Trump or a follower of Jesus. Life is a series of choices, and depending on how Trump's second term goes here, I think it might end up being a series of daily choices. But those choices add up, and those choices shape our character. I don't think that what I'm saying is unusual. I think this is the way Christians have usually understood our role in the world. Of course, we support our leaders when we can, and we promote our preferred candidates. But we don't support them 100%. We call them out, or we remove our support when they go off the rails. What's different now, I think, is that Donald Trump insists that his followers show their loyalty to him by embracing his own distorted worldview. And that's a kind of loyalty that no normal American leader would demand of his followers. So that's what I mean when I say we can't follow Trump and follow Jesus. We've seen the way of Trump for years now, and we know that it stands in stark opposition to the way of Jesus. So sure, sometimes the way of Trump might coincidentally run parallel to the way of Jesus. But when the two ways diverge, then we must choose the way of Jesus. And in those moments, which I think are going to come early and often in Trump's second term, we just can't follow Trump and follow Jesus. So thanks for listening.